Welcome, everyone. Where are you? You are at our panel session titled Creating Win-Win Renewable Energy Projects for Wisconsin Communities. Thank you for coming. So the title that was selected reflects one of Renew Wisconsin's core tenets, and certainly one that I strongly believed in my long association on staff there. And that tenet is that bringing renewable energy online yields multiple benefits arrayed across different constituencies. It's not just one thing for one group of people. There is a public purpose that is being served. And these constituencies include farmers, local governments, neighbors, conservationists, utilities, wildlife, pollinators, and state residents who breathe the air and drink the water here. That's a pretty broad cross-section of the population. Now, for the purposes of this particular session, we're going to concentrate on solar power development, because that has been, in this state, the most powerful pathway to decarbonization. It is far and away the one that's leading the reductions in carbon emissions and particulate matter. No other renewable energy source comes close, at least in the last 10 years. More than 2 gigawatts of front-of-meter solar power have been energized in the last 5 years. In 2015, that number was close to 0. So we have over 2,000 megawatts. The output from this cohort of solar generating capacity will equate to about 6% of Wisconsin electricity sales this year. The plants already in operation will yield this year about $10 million in payments to local governments. Moreover, a large fraction of approved battery storage capacity is paired with these plants. So yes, solar is also a driver of energy storage. And thanks to a strong policy preference in favor of non-combustible renewables, state and local governments have approved more than 5,000 megawatts of solar power. So in addition to the 2,000 already operating, there's another 3,000 that's waiting in the wings or already under construction. And I have a few handouts that I placed on that chair over there that document where solar in Wisconsin stands today. Okay, feel free to take one. But not everyone in Wisconsin is a happy camper when it comes to utility-scale solar. Local opposition has flared up in places, fueled by a combination of fear of a changed landscape, mistrust of the developer, a sense of powerlessness within the community, and misinformation. Sadly, much of it deliberate. Given this, along with solar's rapid growth, it should not come as a surprise that legislation has been introduced, SB 3 is the name, to give local governments effectively veto power over solar and wind projects larger than 15 megawatts. I can assure you that adoption of this legislation will slow solar power's growth to a crawl. Now, our 3 panelists today, who are very much passionate and knowledgeable observers and participants on the scene, will explore how community engagement, public education, and stakeholder collaboration can create renewable energy projects that will benefit and gain the support and perhaps even the trust of Wisconsin communities. So let's start off with to my farthest left, is Rick Coelho. Rick is an experienced organizer and campaign strategist with experience working on political campaigns in diverse communities at the local, state, and federal levels. As rural energy campaign manager for Clean Wisconsin, he uses that experience to connect with rural communities to build trust among those who might be skeptical about the clean energy transition. Then comes Grace Lakey, a Madison native. She is the Midwest Regional Vice President of REN USA. After several years in politics in Madison and Dane County, she has spent the last 4 years working on wind, solar, and transmission projects, focusing on development within the MISO region. MISO is our regional transmission operator. At USA, Grace works to bridge the gap between development and community with the goal of stronger partnership between the two. And finally, closest to me is Beth Esser. Beth Esser is an Associate Director of Development at One Energy Renewables, a public benefit corporation that has successfully sited 2 utility-scale and several dozen community-scale solar plants in Wisconsin. In her role, she oversees the development of distribution-connected solar projects in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. And then last, a little bit about myself. My name is Michael Vickerman. I've been associated with Renew Wisconsin since 1991, and I am a very grizzled veteran of the siting wars, and I think I probably have more scars than any other combatant. Sometimes I feel that is the appropriate word, especially in the area of wind. Thankfully, the solar development experience has been a little smoother and has involved fewer weapons thrown in various directions, usually towards me. But anyway, I was very much involved with the wind siting history, the wars, if you will, in the double aughts, and was involved in the passage of what was called the Wisconsin Wind Siting Law, that was adopted in 2009. Which unfortunately, after the backlash, there was virtually no wind development in the state for many, many, many years. But thankfully, that's not the case with solar. It is happening here in our backyards. And we want to dive into that because we really do want communities to feel at home with this particularly beneficial and valuable source of energy. So let's dive in with the questions, and then after I finish asking questions, then my associate Ben will read any questions that appear on the Whova app, and then we'll just throw it open to questions from the audience. Okay. So my first question to you all is, what practices have been effective when developing large renewable projects and working with communities where these projects are located? So why don't we start with Beth and work our way out.
All right. Well, thank you, Michael, for having us be part of this presentation. One Energy has developed, built, and engineered and constructed over 50 projects in the Midwest, so we have some experience in this. And it's very important for us at One Energy that these best practices that we've found are not kept secret as some competitive advantage for us. It's really part of our approach to raise up the industry as a whole. And, you know, because it only takes one bad experience really to hurt the entire industry. So happy to be here to talk about what we've learned. And really it's about relationship building, and that's just what we were hearing about in the conversation about workforce development too. But relationship building starts with our landowners that we work with, the neighbors, the communities that we build our projects in, and other community members that are part of the township and county boards that we often are meeting with to permit these projects. So, you know, how do relationships work? Good communication, trust, listening, being respectful of what people are bringing to the table and what they know about their communities. Farmers are really the smartest people I know, so we need to listen to them. We need to be accountable. We need to do what we say we're going to do. As developers, we need to make things right when we make mistakes. For example, we were working with a landowner who was going to also graze their sheep on a project, and we did not put the gate that they wanted for their sheep to enter the project in the right location. We had to fix that. It was a little bit more costly for us, but we certainly wanted to make that right. And we need to be available for people when they have questions. So answer the phone is an important thing, return calls. And these things have to happen both before, during, and after a project. So before a project, meeting with neighbors, one-on-one, phone calls, in person, having neighbor meetings where this is happening before a project is being permitted, that's really important and has been helpful. Go to the community where the project is. We set up a table in a field where the solar project was going to get built right across the street from a new subdivision that had gone up next to where our project was going to build. And we told them we were going to be there. We showed up after work hours, and people came over, had some cookies, lemonade with us, and just talked about what their questions were. And we were able to kind of ease their concerns about what construction was going to look like and such. Having local supporters at permit meetings is incredibly important. Having landowners be there to tell their stories. In the media training this morning, they were talking about the importance of stories. And developers are really not the storytellers. The people who are involved in these projects are the storytellers. So having a landowner come and tell the community why they want to do this and what it means for their family and their farm is really important. Keeping everybody informed as you go throughout the stages of the project. And after projects get built, it's almost more important, I think, that we show up and do what we said we were going to do, because I've heard from townships and counties who have said, this developer approached us and then we never heard from them again. And we don't want to be that type of partner. We want to have long-lasting relationships in these communities. We like to give tours for counties and township boards that are going to be permitting these projects. So having over 50 projects really is helpful, because there's usually a project nearby that we can get people in and walk around and see what it's like. And I've had a county zoning administrator say to me, oh, this is really just a simple thing here. It's not that complicated, and it's not scary. So our gestures don't have to be these grand gestures. They just have to be genuine, and that's what we really try to do at One Energy.
Yeah, I think kind of building on what Beth mentioned with the communication, the honesty, the transparency, our biggest point when we're chatting with developers is that communication should be early and it should be often. I think there is an understandable reticence for developers to want to wait to have conversations with elected officials, with stakeholders, with other community members until they feel more confident that there is going to be a project. And there's validity in that, but I think it has to be a careful balance. It's a little bit of a tightrope in that sense of you don't want to oversell, you don't want to overpromise, but the worst thing that can happen to a project is for elected officials or stakeholders or even landowners to be getting information about your project from someone that's not you. Not only does that undermine this, when you express yourself as a partner and as a transparent member of the community, when they're hearing information from people that aren't you, that really undercuts that belief. And I think the other part of a relationship is that it is a two-way street. If I am meeting a new friend or even a family member, and it's someone who is always calling and asking for money and for me to show up and to cook things for Thanksgiving, eventually you're going to stop answering the phone. It has to be that you're bringing something to this relationship too, and what you have to bring to that relationship is more than just the project. There are obvious benefits to all of these projects in our communities, and it's important to highlight those. There are economic benefits in Wisconsin that we have done a really great job of ensuring those benefits stay local and are committed to supporting schools, roads. It has to be more than that. And if you are a partner and you are a neighbor in the community, you have to understand that community. I think every town in Wisconsin has our cherry festivals, our corn festivals, knowing those festivals, being at those festivals, being present, understanding, hey, I'm developing in a town and their boys basketball team goes to the state tournament every year. I'm gonna go to a game, I'm gonna be there, I'm gonna buy some cookies. It has to be a real partner and a real relationship. If the extent of your relationship to a community is, well, I'm bringing this big, great project and all this tax revenue to you, therefore you should do all of these things for me, that's not a relationship. It's you asking and taking and them really not getting a lot in return. And that's where those things will break down. And that's when push comes to shove. You've asked for too much. And then, like Beth said, showing up at those hearings, showing up in these public ways, people aren't going to want to do that if you're not doing the same thing for them.
Well, I certainly would echo, I think, most of what Grace and Beth have said. I approach this from the perspective of I've spent my time listening to a lot of these communities. And, to underscore the importance of early engagement, I think the first time your leasing agents are out in the field, the town knows that there's a project coming because probably the next morning at the gas station, someone's going to say, hey, guess what, who came to my office? And so I think that, or my farm, and I think that really underscores the need to be open and prepared to engage. Am I better now?
Yes.
There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Little technical difficulties. Oh, I can hear myself. So what I was just saying was that I agree with most of what's been said. But, to keep in mind, early engagement with the broader community, I think Grace highlighted a good point. It's with the lack of information that gets filtered in by potential project opponents or intentional misinformation, that's the atmosphere that creates the opposition that's driving, that we're seeing out against a lot of these projects. And so, by the time your leasing agent has been out in the field talking to a handful of people, the community knows that there's something coming. And to the degree to which that remains a set of uncertainty about fear of change, which I think is driving a lot of this opposition, your sense of place, your willingness to be open and engaging with that community, I think really matters. Again, another key thing I think that's been woven throughout today about making these win-win projects has been, meeting people where they're at. And I think recognizing that for, community that's looking to host one of these projects, agriculture is a big part of their identity. That this, whether something that seems, relatively innocuous from those of us who want to accelerate this clean energy transition is a big change. And I'm going to steal a line from one of my partners, who likes to say big change leads to big feelings. And I think that's what we're seeing in terms of some of the growing opposition. And so, projects that approach their outreach, recognizing where the people in those communities at are going to have the most success.
Thank you. All right. Now, our next question is, what information about renewable energy projects is missing or misunderstood? And how can the industry and supporters improve the situation? Let's start with Grace.
How much time do you have? I think there is a really large section of renewable energy that is misunderstood. I think we see it every day. Part of the misunderstanding and the misinformation, I think, does come from the inability to recognize when something is willful and intentional misinformation and when something is stemming from a place of fear. And I think, we discussed how getting in there early prevents this, but you meet people in the community who there are always going to be people who don't want the project for whatever reason. There are a lot of people in that community who are hearing really scary things. And we're in this industry and we understand that a lot of these claims are somewhat outrageous and that there isn't any base to them. But when you are hearing from people who you've known your whole life and have trusted your whole life that this is going to change your way of life, it's going to change everything you've ever known and rip the fabric of your community apart, that's terrifying. And as much as or as little as I know about this industry or any industry, if I trust someone and they're telling me that, I'm going to be really scared. And so I think we as the industry and as stakeholders need to be better about approaching this with that empathy and with that understanding of this is coming from a place of fear. This is coming from a place of not wanting things to change. It's not malicious, and being more open to their feedback. And I think just our openness to hearing them and understanding what they're saying is going to create an openness within them to hear us and hear what we're saying. And I think part of that too is not only the messages we're delivering them, but where we're delivering them. I think this industry has modernization that it needs to do outside of the technology with how we're communicating with people. It used to be, the town coffee shop and some of those third spaces is where everyone is getting their information, where people are organizing, where these conversations are happening. And unfortunately, that's not the reality anymore. A lot of this is happening online. A lot of these conversations are happening in that internet sphere. And I think that's another space that we need to occupy more. We need to dedicate more resources to correcting these narratives online, to combating some of this, what appears to be a grassroots opposition initiative, and being more present in those online spaces, because I think that's where the misinformation is growing, and I think that is where we are lacking at times in our ability to combat it.
Rick?
Well, I was going to get a little wonkier and talk a little bit about Wisconsin utility aid payments. So this is something that, if you go to most project websites, you'll say, oh, there's going to be X amount of annual revenue for the communities that are hosting the project. I think we need more stories about what utility aid actually means, told by the people benefiting. I'm speaking to a town official hosting a project who said we were struggling and now we're not. Now that's getting someone to say that on the record and be part of communication efforts is going to be way more effective. But real stories that have benefited from utility aid in Wisconsin, I think, are one of the things we are missing right now. I think another area that we could do better education on is letting communities know that they are in a position to negotiate a community benefits agreement, a joint development agreement, and provide some of the technical resources to help them figure out what they should be asking for. I mean, one of the things you hear when you listen to communities is, how does this benefit me? Maybe it's the largest landowner in town who's going to be able to retire on some nice lease payments, but how does that compensate me or my community for what is going to be a big change for us? And we know that there's tools out there to help address those types of concerns, but there's, I think, a gap in awareness of what those tools are and how you can best engage with them. And kind of last but not least is we need more live stories. I was talking to a farmer who told me, I actually like having wind because, the speed and direction of wind are two of the biggest factors when I'm out in the field. And when I'm out by the project, I can tell those two things pretty easily. And I have some land outside of the project area, and it's a lot harder to do that. Getting those kind of stories out there about, living side by side, existing projects here in Wisconsin or, from people in similar Midwest states, I think is another kind of missing part of the discussion.
Beth?
Yes, thank you, and I echo what you both said, and have some other examples of things that we feel are missing and misunderstood. And I want to say that as a developer, I'm not going to be the best person to fill in this information to communities, because I'm biased in their eyes for sure, and I'm not going to be as trustworthy as these other trusted messengers that can relay this information to people in the communities. So I look to all of you out in the audience who may live in these communities or may be in representing other parts of the industry that can be a better storyteller on this. Solar is the most cost-effective source of new energy, and that needs to be understood much more. Bill McKibben is one of my climate heroes, and just this week in a newsletter, he said, we need to make sure people understand that renewable energy is not the Whole Foods of energy. It's the Costco of energy. So let's make sure people understand that. It's long-term, stable, cost-effective pricing for customers. We have an executive order called Unleashing American Energy. Renewable energy is American energy. It's American jobs, it's American industry, and it's American energy independence. So we need to be promoting that much more. I really appreciate Clean Wisconsin and Renew Wisconsin in their efforts of documenting. My colleague Nolan, while he was interning at Renew, worked on documenting how much land is really going to be utilized for solar if we are to achieve our goals as a state by 2050. It's 1.4% of land. That's not that much. people often think that we're going to be covered in solar panels. There's going to be a lot of farm fields still. Clean Wisconsin has shown that solar is a much more efficient use of our land. So corn is growing on our land right now, much for ethanol, and solar is 100 times more efficient. So these are, facts, but we also need stories, and we need to be able to share that with people. The dual use of land is really a great way to tell the stories of how farmers are diversifying in having both agriculture and solar on their farms. And really the byproduct of solar energy, the ecosystem benefits, which doesn't really speak to everybody for sure, is a really important part of this work, and I think can be told through creative stories. The pollinators, the insects, the birds that are all benefiting from this, the replenishment of our soils. I think the other thing that's misunderstood is just how hard it is to actually make these projects come to fruition. A lot of times people will say, I'm for this, I just want it somewhere else. And it's actually really hard to find a landowner to partner with, the existing electrical infrastructure that will allow a project to tie into the grid, and the land itself being suitable for a project. So it's not easy to make all three of those things come together, and it'd be nice to help educate people on that as well.
Thank you. The last prepared question is, in what ways can stakeholders collaborate to create support for large renewable energy projects across Wisconsin? And we're going to start with Rick.
Well, I think as a kind of third-party organization, I think one of the ways we can help is by creating spaces for collaboration amongst groups interested in siting in Wisconsin. And we are part of an effort we're calling the Wisconsin Siting Table. I think some of our partners are here in the room right now. And this is trying to bring together a group of local and national stakeholders across with a diversity of opinions on renewable energy, coming from diverse, political ideologies, coming from the conservation community, the farming community, the labor community. There's a lot of interest in making sure these projects move forward, and we all approach it with our own specific organizational imperatives, goals, priorities. And creating that space, the business community, as I see Kelsey and Chris sitting here, the business community is also sitting at this table. And we are trying to create a space where we can both share information, what are the projects happening, so that we can potentially get out to communities early and engage the public with education campaigns, but also listening campaigns that, and listening sessions that try to find out what are the good faith concerns the community has, so that we can then work collaboratively with the developer community, the utility community, to address those concerns on the front end, so that we get, again, win-win projects for the community. And, this is an evolving project, and I think collective action requires the experience of a continued work together to build trust. And that's the other piece I think that's really important, is actually doing work together so that you can build the trust to do more successful work together in the future.
Beth?
So as a parent, I often tell my kids when they are struggling with getting along with a classmate or a team member, you just got to find a way to get along and move forward. And we as adults need to take those same lessons and figure out ways to work together. We need diverse collaboration coming together. Time is of the essence right now, right, to make this energy transition happen. As a developer, we can't be afraid of ordinances and regulation. We need to be at the table, being a part of that conversation, and commit to best practices, because this is going to lead to more acceptance and a smoother ride to making this transition happen. We need the for-profit and the nonprofit entities to come together. We need utilities and activists and advocacy groups to come together. This isn't a either or, it's a both and conversation that we can collaborate and make these projects happen. We need people to show up. It's easier to show up against something than it is for. So if you live in a rural community especially, you have an enormous amount of leverage. If you come and just say you're for the project, that's super helpful for township and county boards to hear from people saying that. We need YIMBYs, so we've heard of NIMBYs. We need people to say yes in my backyard. And one of my favorite projects we've worked on, and I really like all of our projects, but one of my favorite ones is landowners who sold their land to a rural electric cooperative for the sole purpose of building a solar project. And these now neighbors of the project see this project. They're on the bluffs of the Mississippi and they have land that overlooks this solar project. And so they are a perfect example of a YIMBY, and they are some of my heroes as well. Some of my coworkers have heard me say this and they're probably gonna roll their eyes and laugh at me, but we need artists and Hollywood to get on board and help share these stories. So we need a visual landscape of a countryside that shows windmills and solar panels. We need songs, John Denver, Take Me Home Country Roads along the solar panels and the windmills. I'm not gonna sing because I'm not a singer. I love cheesy Christmas movies. I just got done watching as many as I could over the holidays. We need rom-coms that show the gorgeous solar installer meeting their partner, while they were building a solar project. These are the types of things that help culture shift. And when have we ever done any kind of major transition in our culture without artists being part of it? And lastly, I'll just say we need to have fun. Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson is someone I've never met, but is a new climate hero of mine. And she has a book and podcast, What If We Get It Right? Visions of a Climate Future. She would actually credit to her for the rom-com idea. And also just said, environmental groups come to her, high school groups say, why is no one coming to my meeting? And she's like, are you having fun? Does somebody want to come to a party that isn't fun? And I really credit my One Energy colleagues in the audience for helping make this work fun. It is super hard. We work harder than I've ever worked in my life, but it's fun, and I'm so glad I get to be a part of it.
Yeah, I think Beth and Rick have both made excellent points. Elaborating a little bit on Beth's point about showing up, not only showing up, but showing up at the most local level. And showing up when it's the hardest and when you don't want to the most. I think it is, glamorous in this sense of glamour, to be working on a national level or even a statewide level. There is more eyes on that. There's more acclaim to doing that. And it probably is a little bit more fun. Although I've had a lot of fun at some county board meetings. But those county board meetings, those township meetings, that's where people need you. That is where the real work has to be done. Beth mentioned developers can't be afraid of an ordinance or conversations with those county board members. And I couldn't agree more, but I think the community can't be either. It is really easy to be against something. Like you said, if I have a bad meal, I am really eager to write about it on Yelp. If I have a good meal, I think it's a good meal and I might recommend it to my friends, but I'm not really incentivized to go out of my way to say something. It is really, really easy for the opposition to show up together. It's easy to oppose something. It's easy to feel like if I'm in the majority, speaking up is no big deal. When it gets really hard is when you're the only person who feels that way. And I even saw it in my hometown with our solar project. There was a lot of opposition, and my dad, who has never been afraid to say anything in his entire life, was a little bit nervous about saying something in support because he was the only one. And so if it's somebody that eager to speak is already afraid, we have to make that easier for them by showing up before them, encouraging them to be there by our sides instead of being there by themselves is the real key to that. And again, coming in those small towns, your local zoning board, your local planning and zoning, it kills my heart a little bit every time when I hear someone say, well, change doesn't happen at my local zoning board of appeals, because that's exactly where the change is happening. They are making a bigger impact on your life and a bigger difference in your day-to-day activities than the president of this country ever will. That's where we need to be organizing. That's where we need to be showing up. And that's where people aren't showing up. And it has left that huge gap for opposition to fill so much space in those small local levels. And again, I will go back to it. We need more active, positive voices on social media. I know that nobody wants to spend their Friday night arguing on Facebook, but sometimes we need some people who are going to spend their Friday night arguing on Facebook and saying, that's not true. You're spreading misinformation. Why are you saying that? You know, you have an elected official that logs onto Facebook because they've got them too, and 90 posts are against this local project, and every comment in that post is agreeing with them and reinforcing the negative things they're saying. That has a huge impact on them, whether they want to admit it or not. Having people in those comments and in those posts, it feels silly, but that can move the needle in a really impactful way.
I'd like to add to that a little bit, starting with Beth's point about having fun. I recall the first commercial wind project in Wisconsin, which went up in 1999. So that's 25 years ago. It's still operating. And the utility that built it, I thought did a really good job of reaching out to the community. But what cemented that perception and spread it was that on the day of the ribbon cutting, which was maybe 3 or 4 days after the project went online, just beating the tax credit deadline for that year, they invited the community to show up and eat lunch. It was a huge banquet of fried chicken. It was delivered there at 1 o'clock in the afternoon after the speeches were given, and the people showed up. There were about 200 people there, and they just really enjoyed the combination of delicious fried chicken and wind turbines. Somehow they didn't seem so scary and threatening and alien anymore when you're holding a drumstick in your hand, and that really worked. The other point I want to make is playing off of what Rick said about he brought up the utility local aids law, which apportions state taxes back to the local community. A very, very important inducement for communities to welcome or at least accept renewable energy in their midst. But there is a bit of a policy hole in that law. It covers county governments, it covers town governments. It does not have anything specific for school districts. Well, school districts are local government entities, and perhaps the drafters of the law thought that counties and towns would give some of that money over to school districts. Well, they miscalculated there. So what some developers do, and this also touches on the issue of joint development agreements, is that in addition to providing what is statutorily required to the towns and counties, they also make provision for the school district in the area where the project is located, and that can be a game changer or a tiebreaker. I don't know if all of you saw in the renewable energy stories this morning, the high school green team from Chippewa Falls. That is an undertaking that could be funded by the renewable energy project. And look how enthusiastic the green team members were. They learned how to operate drones. They're fully licensed, and they spread that enthusiasm to their households, their families, and to their friends. They become ambassadors to clean energy. If you think creatively about engaging constituency that by law they're just not accounted for. So I wanted to just mention those two things as ways where developers can just go beyond what is minimally necessary or required and really make a difference in terms of the community reception. So with that, that ends our prepared questions. So I'm going to call upon my colleague, Ben, see if there are any questions that showed up on the
Hello.
conference app.
Yes, there were. We do have like 3 minutes left, so I'll try to get through it as much of this as I can. One of the really good questions that came up was, how do you define a win in a community when their win is that the project doesn't happen?
I think what we always say is that, again, there are always going to be people who don't want it, and to them, the win is driving the project away. To me, a win in that situation is, I don't want this project. I don't want any project. If it's coming, I'm glad it's you. They're never going to be happy that the project is here. If we can convince them that you are a good steward and the best person to trust to develop this project, that to me is a win.
And kind of on that point, I think opposition, it might not be representative, and so some of the loudest voices might create the perception that the community doesn't want the project. It's because the people who are in the middle or who support the project, as we've discussed, don't want to put their heads up. They're not arguing on Facebook. Their neighbors are not treating them with respect, and there's a hostility out there that prevents the supporters from speaking up. That's just reality. And so I think it's let's figure out who is defining that as a loss, because for the greater community that is focusing on potential benefits, through utility aid and a JDA, a win can be defined as making sure that those needs are addressed and they are envisioning that positive opportunity.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that, and I would just add that a win to a community that is not interested, or maybe a neighbor, an individual neighbor or two that are not excited about the project, is for us sticking through the hard times, being human. We don't always get along with each other, right? But it doesn't mean that we run away or we lower our standards. We just want to keep doing a good job, keep showing up, and eventually I think the end product speaks for itself, because these are good neighbors. They're quiet, they're clean, and people often come around to them. And so my boss has a great story of a neighbor who was in tears at a permit meeting, and I got to witness being in their home after the project was constructed and talking to them about how they really came around to this project, and they made us brownies or some delicious pumpkin bar. That's the win, sticking it out long enough to get to that point where we may not see eye to eye on everything, but we can at least figure out a way to move forward.
Great. Any other questions?
Yes, there's one that I think, even though we're at 2:15, I think it's a good one for large-scale utilities folks here is, in Wisconsin, when these projects get built, there's a transfer of that ownership usually to a utility, or there is transfer of ownership to the utility. How can developers, even after that transfer of ownership happens, still be connected with the community if they don't own and operate it anymore?
Yeah, that happens. We like to connect with the community through our ongoing conversations we have with landowners. We continue to be available for townships and counties where these projects are located in case they have any questions. They can come to us. Like I said before, we offer tours of these projects to communities, high school groups. Chippewa Falls High School, our favorite green team ever. We work on panel donations with the school districts in the communities where we're building our projects. So we get to have that ongoing relationship where we donate panels and help them get a solar installation at their school. And then, that just has turned into some long-term relationships of different collaborations. This December, I got to go to one of our projects that a local high school built some bluebird houses, and they installed them around that project. So being able to have that relationship with the utility or the power purchaser of that, to be able to stay connected to those projects, is important for us.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about building relationships in the community and building relationships with these stakeholders, once you have that relationship, it honestly feels really natural to stay in touch. It feels really natural to stay up to speed. You know, I mentioned earlier, you get involved in the community, you find these corn festivals, you find the restaurants that you like, and I think a lot of people would be surprised at how even years after a project is done or you have offloaded it, you're still thinking about that one booth that had that one milkshake at that corn festival, and you're gonna make your way there. There are stakeholders or landowners that you have forged real relationships with that you still want to hear from and you want to check in on. I think it feels difficult in a theological sense of looking at it and thinking, oh my gosh, how do I stay in touch with hundreds of stakeholders and hundreds of landowners? I think the more time you spend in that community and the more you become that true partner, the more natural it feels, to the point where you're not even thinking twice about your yearly trip up north to go to their festival that you fell in love with years ago in a development process.
Yeah, and I would add, I think it's an example of follow through, and a follow through that will benefit your next project, because if you've maintained the relationships in one community, I mean, this is something we hear, you know, your behavior of a developer in another community impacts your ability to site in a new community. And so I mean, maintaining those good relationships, having those folks being willing to be advocates that you kept your word, I think would be really helpful as you look to expand into different communities.
And I would add that even if there is a transfer of the asset from a developer to the utility, it doesn't necessarily mean that the developer goes away. In some cases, the developer is responsible for the construction and the maintenance of the project. So they don't go away. In fact, they are probably more, they're more directly the face of the project than the utility that ends up owning that particular asset. And then Alliant self-developed most of the solar projects in their portfolio. They certainly dove into that particular activity, knowing that they would have to develop expertise for maintaining the project, making and troubleshooting anything that goes wrong, and also being the public face of that project. And so really there aren't that many situations where the developer that initially proposed that project before the permitting authority disappears from the scene.
Cool. Well, we are at our time, and there's so many good other questions within the app, but I'm sure I want to put you guys on the spot, but I'm sure, you know, if other audience members have questions, they can always find you throughout the summit and after this presentation. So, Michael, I don't know if you have any closing remarks or anything, but other than that, it is 2:20.
Oh, no. Enjoy the afternoon break. And thank you very much for coming. That's it.